Well, now we're turning to our own court of public opinion, our virtual courtroom where our in-studio audience will weigh in on the big questions of the day. And tonight, one of the hottest topics in businesses, legislatures, and college campuses all across this country. 3 letters, DEI, short for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, you've probably come across it at work or maybe in school. In 2023, 52% of employed U.S. adults said they have had DEI trainings or meetings at work. We do here at CNN as well, of course, and critics call DEI discriminatory. They say it's nothing but an attempt to solve discrimination against people of color by discriminating against other groups, particularly white Americans. But supporters say DEI, which has been around for decades, is being weaponized politically and misrepresented. Since 2023, 82 anti-DEI bills targeting programs at colleges have been introduced in 28 states and in Congress. 8 have been signed into law in states like Texas and also Florida. Well, tonight, the question for our court of public opinion: has DEI gone too far? We'll hear from Coleman Hughes, the host of the Conversations with Coleman podcast and the author of The End of Race Politics. Also here, Sophia Nelson, a CNN opinion contributor and the author of E Pluribus One, Reclaiming Our Founders' Vision for a United America. Then our audience will weigh in. This is a diverse group of everyday Americans meeting tonight for the first time to share their opinions with each other and you. And I'm as interested as all of you are to hear just what they have to say. Let's begin our conversation now with those who are going to argue both sides of the position. Let me begin with you both. How do you define DEI? Coleman?
Yeah, so DEI in the past 10 years, it's not really your father's DEI. It's an ideology that is new, which divides the world into oppressed groups and oppressor groups. And it says whites and Jews are oppressor groups, blacks, Hispanics, Asians, depending on the day. And it judges you by your group membership, promotes race-based policies like affirmative action over race-neutral policies, and does not tolerate dissent. It considers any disagreement to be off limits. So this is what has crept out into DEI departments in colleges, in corporations over the past 10 years. And what you're seeing in the recent backlash is really a backlash against the people who enforce this particular ideology on sectors of the American public.
Sophia, how do you define it?
DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion is, I think, something that, as he says, probably in the last 10 years has absolutely overreached. But DEI at its core, everybody's for diversity, everybody's for inclusion, Laura, but nobody wants to deal with that word equity. And that's what this is really about from a historic point of view, whether you're dealing with affirmative action and where we've come from there. As Bill Clinton once famously said, mend it, don't end it. That's how I feel about DEI. We have to deal with this restorative justice piece. I do agree with Coleman that what has happened, unfortunately, on college campuses in particular is it has become a very rigid set of rules, statements, and policies that if you move left or right in those and you're not lockstep in line, you'll find yourself in a lot of trouble. And we know that I experienced that firsthand. So I say all that to say that I think I really want to focus on the equity piece of it, because diversity and inclusion is the easy part.
But even, well, isn't, first of all, the easy part diversity and inclusion? Because, Coleman, I think you've presented statements in the past where you think that if it's forced diversity, it's actually antithetical.
Right, yeah. So I mean, in my view, diversity is like love. If it happens naturally, it's the best thing in the world. But if it's forced, you've kind of missed the point. And so the question, say you're a corporation, right? And you want more racial diversity. The question is, how do you get that? Do you get that in a way that is consistent with merit-based hiring? For instance, by just casting your net much wider in terms of job applicants? That's totally healthy. That's a good thing. Or are you doing this thing where you say, well, we need a black person or Hispanic person for this job, so we're going to grab this person regardless of whether they're prepared for this job, right? That's too much of what DEI has been. So someone like Roland Fryer, who's a Harvard economist, what he does is he actually looks at corporations, gathers data on them, and tells them statistically whether they have a bias in one direction or the other. And the NFL hired him to do this, and he was able to give them really legitimate feedback about where they don't have biases, where they do have biases, and that actually allows you to act in an evidence-based way. That's what DEI should be.
But DEI, the way you just described it, presumes it's a quota as opposed to an ideology. Which is it?
I have an issue with this word merit-based because the presumption is that every white male that has a job in the Fortune 500 got there because of merit, or every white male or white female, as it were, in the corporate sector and the academic sector, they all got there because they were qualified and had merit. But anybody with my skin color or with another color or from another group, somehow they took something that was somebody else's and they didn't have merit. That's a problem. You got to look at the data. He's right about what he says in the sense of how we cast those nets. But it goes back to restorative justice, as I said, and restorative equity. When you have systemic racist structures for 300 years of slavery, 100 years of Jim Crow, it is fool's gold to think that in 50 years you're going to eliminate all that and everything's going to be equal. And that's the problem I have with this debate. We're ignoring history, we're ignoring data.
I think we're confusing issues. DEI, once you get to the point where someone is 25, 30 years old and you're deciding whether to hire them or not, that's not the moment to introduce race-based decision-making. The problem you're talking about is completely real, but it has to be dealt with at the 0 to 18 level. K through 12 education has to be improved. We have to level the playing field at that level rather than tilt the playing field at the top level and imagine that we're doing something beneficial. The problem starts when you're a kid, right? It starts with intergenerational poverty, bad schools, and that's where the focus should be. And then once people are adults, we should judge them without regard to race.
Is diversity synonymous with class?
Look at the wealth gap in this country. Again, the data doesn't lie. African Americans will take 200 years to catch up as of today with just the basic wealth gap of savings, investment, ownership of homes, whatever, on the most base level. 200 years to catch up. And we're going to talk about K through 18, and you see what I mean? It doesn't work.
Well, real quick, I want to hear from both of you in your concluding statements about how you course correct based on your positions. Coleman?
So course correcting for DEI, I think it looks very much like what someone like Roland Fryer is doing. If you're a corporation, you want to have a DEI program, sure, but it should not be an ideological litmus test. It should not be signing a loyalty pledge to apply for a job, which it is at many universities. It should be a serious evidence-based look at the composition of your company to see if you have a bias in one direction or the other or one of many directions. Do it seriously or don't do it at all.
Sophia?
We have to rethink it, reimagine. And I want to be inclusive. I think white men have to be at the table. I think all groups have to be at the table because if we're not talking e pluribus unum out of many one, we're not solving this problem together.
Very fascinating arguments from both of you just now. Coleman and Sophia, thanks for making the arguments you've made. I do wonder what everyone is thinking. Stick around because we're going to turn to the jury and get them to weigh in on what they've heard and what they think about it. Back in a moment. Well, we're back in our court of public opinion. We've been discussing diversity, equity, and inclusion programs across the United States. We just heard a pretty lively discussion with Coleman Hughes and Sophia Nelson. So now I want to bring in our group of everyday Americans who all have very different perspectives on DEI and see what they heard today. Let me begin with you all, and thank you for being here. I wonder what arguments stood out to you on either side of the issue. What's your thought? Juror number 2.
So Sophia mentioned inclusion. I think that DEI truly is a very complicated topic, right? But with inclusion, you can hire as many minorities as you want. But if we're not getting a seat at the table, it doesn't really matter. So I think the DEI really needs to concentrate on inclusion as really the basis for what we're looking for.
You're nodding.
I think that inclusion can encompass many different things as well as sexual orientation or disabilities too. And I think that those are really vital voices to bring to the table. Just like juror number 2 was talking about.
Are they part of the conversation?
I had some questions about her description of merit. She had some criticisms of the way that, you know, maybe somebody of color is seen as only have gotten that job because they are a person of color.
What are your questions? You can ask them here.
Well, I'm very curious then, what is the point of the merit system, right? It seems like when you start asking those questions, that actually is what puts those thoughts into people's head. Well, if we are requiring people to have a quota and we're rejecting the merit system, is that not then, by and large, forcing people to then think those thoughts?
I am 1,000% for merit because everything I have gotten has been because of merit. What I don't appreciate are the arguments that what I've gotten is because I'm black and I'm female and I don't deserve it and I took someone else's spot who did deserve it. That's the discussion in the public forum right now, and that's divisive, it's harmful, and it's ugly. And I think there's a presupposition there, Laura, that it belongs to somebody else. It's just like when people say, I'm taking my country back. From who? What does that even mean? What are we talking about?
Can I say something to that briefly, too? I mean, I think we have to be honest about the fact that DEI programs and affirmative action have been a rejection of merit in favor of race-based admissions in some cases and hiring. I mean, this was proven in the case of Harvard that your race was equivalent to, several hundred points on the SAT, and that if the same candidate, if they were Asian, would not get in as opposed to if they were black. That may have affected me in my life too. I have no idea if there's certain jobs that I might have gotten because I was black, and I don't think the employer would ever tell me. And this is one of the signals that we're uncomfortable with it, is that we can't admit that it's even a real thing.
Well, the idea of the affirmative action discussions and the plus factors and the evolution of these case laws is certainly something still in the public square. What do you think?
Well, I think a lot of what Coleman said made sense to me. And one of the questions I had was, if we have DEI now, why do we also have discrimination laws on the books? What are those doing? And what's the purpose of having both?
Is there a redundancy to you all?
On a university campus, I'm very suspicious. If the DEI office didn't come to college tomorrow, would anyone notice? How long would it take for anyone to notice that they weren't there? I know what the professors do. I know what the admissions department does. I know what the administrators do. I know what the janitors do. I'm not really sure what the DEI office does other than get involved in the occasional cancellation.
The reason you have DEI goes back to what I said at the beginning. You're trying to put together a systemic structure in place in your company, in your college, wherever it is, to say, we're not doing well bringing in people of color or LGBTQ plus or whatever. We want a diverse student body. We want a diverse company. So we're trying to put in structures into place that welcome those groups and make them feel welcome.
Let's expand the concept of DEI beyond just the idea of hiring and the actual composition of the student body or, of course, the job force, and also talk about the idea of the education, this different curriculum and beyond that's also part of the conversation. When you were hearing discussions about merit or hearing discussions about quotas as it's been articulated, what was your reaction?
In DEI, someone always loses, it seems like. I mean, Asian Americans brought that affirmative action case to the Supreme Court because they were losing out on scholarships and positions at incredible universities. And so that to me seems like the hardest part of DEI, is that someone decides that someone loses. And even in women's sports, right? Women lose in favor of trans women earning those trophies. And so that's, I think, the hardest part for me.
So you all see DEI as synonymous with affirmative action. Is that right? And hearing the arguments being raised?
I don't know. I thought affirmative action was much more codified in law, and DEI is much more of a PR campaign or a way to, identify some program with a university or a workplace.
And I disagree with that, because there's a case in Florida where when they took DEI off the campus, so many students felt like they weren't included anymore. And the optics of losing that and taking it off campus, so many students were upset about that it was a place for them to feel comfortable when they went to the DEI office, and now it's gone. And so those students feel rejected, they feel left out, they don't feel a part of the school anymore because that office is gone now.
Do you see the idea of DEI that someone always must lose? You heard juror number 3.
I don't think that someone always must lose, but I think that there's only things to gain, especially what juror number 2 was saying about students having that place to go to feel included. I was recently part of a college campus, and I did see how much that really impacted all of my fellow peers and how it meant a lot to them to have somewhere to go, even if it wasn't necessarily something that you could point to say, here's a statistic, here is exactly how X, Y, and Z, this number of students benefited this way, this number of students got this many jobs because of what we have been providing them with. It's more of the feeling that they got. And I think that that mental benefit was, yeah, for sure.
Is there a way for DEI to be corrected or improved based on your understanding of what it is?
Well, certainly we shouldn't be having trainings at work where they say that we're training people to how to be less white. Coca-Cola had that example a couple years ago. So certainly that it make people feel good. That did not make you feel included.
I've been in several trainings at my corporate, and I've never heard of them saying being less white. I don't think that's necessarily what the training is meant to be. I don't think that
shouldn't be, certainly, but Coca-Cola did do that. So we shouldn't have that anywhere.
Let me ask, I'm gonna go down the line with each of you here and just ask, do you feel, and I know it's self-reflection, that you have an understanding of what DEI is for across the board? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And
I
I know I'm hesitating because I think the purest form of DEI is so different than DEI in practice. And so
what is the difference to you?
DEI in its purest form, I think, is a lot of what Sophia was saying. And I think that the purest ideals are exactly what America is all about. And in practice, it is so bastardized and has become so harmful and used as a weapon.
4, my tally continues. Do you feel you have an understanding of what DEI is?
I don't know, because it seems like it's changing and shifting every day in the news, and it seems like it was branded to sound like something people would love to support. However, when put in practice, I don't know if it's what people want.
I'm really fascinated by all of your takes on this and the infusion of how the media and society, corporate America, and the educational institutions all weigh in on all of it. Thank you, all of you, and thank you to, again, Coleman Hughes and Sophia Nelson, and special thanks, of course, to our jurors in the Court of Public Opinion. Hey, if you'd like to be a juror in our next Court of Public Opinion, just get in touch with us by filling out the form you can access by scanning the QR code that's on your screen, or you can email us at laracodesjury@cnn.com.